Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady, and in this video I'm reviewing a Chevy Camaro SS 1LE with a 6-speed manual transmission. So listen up, this 1LE package is a special trim level in the Camaro lineup, and what it does is it adds unique looking wheels, front and rear aerodynamics, and of course a suspension upgrade. Now if you're familiar with the Camaro nameplate, you know that it's been around from the 60s and the 70s in the muscle car era when it was competing with the Mustang, the Firebird, and basically the likes. But fast forward about 50 plus years and the Mustang and the Camaro aren't really looked at as muscle cars anymore, but pony cars because of this hybrid sports car nature that they have with packages like this 1LE, and in the Mustang the Performance Package 2, which are more sports or handling oriented. But they don't forget their roots. They still have big V8 engines, manual transmissions, and are rear wheel drive. So the ingredients are still good. But what about the overall product? Is the Camaro still fun to drive? But more importantly, the question I like to ask is it fun to drive all the time? And maybe because this one has a manual transmission, the answer might be yes. We shall see. But what about visibility? Is it as bad as what everybody says it is in this 6th generation of the Camaro? I guess we'll find out. But I hope to answer all of those questions and more in this review of the Camaro SS 1LE. All right, so let's start off the review by talking about the front end, which is probably the most controversial part of this redesigned 6th generation Camaro. So let's start off with the hood, and in the 1LE package, you get a special hood. It's painted in flat black actually. It has a very aggressive nature to it. There are several cuts all over this thing. You have a Stinger style hood which is extremely aggressive. The nice thing I like about it is even though it's aggressive when you look at it up front, when you look at it from the side, there really isn't a very high-rise characteristic to it, and it doesn't impede your vision when you're looking out from the driver's seat. In addition to that, you have these functional heat extractors, which I will show you from underneath the hood once I talk about the engine, but it has a really cool design. There are like these 6 blades, 3 on each side, and it's painted in black, so it suits the flat black nature of the hood. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about the front end, starting off with these headlights. If you're familiar with the 6th generation, these headlights that first came out on the Camaro were a little taller and a little narrower, but now they've kind of gone in the other direction. These are slimmer and wider, but I personally prefer this look much better than the original one. And starting off with the LED lights, they're very slim and they kind of run through the middle of the headlight all the way through to the center section of the top portion of the grille. And then they have the LED lights which have a Camaro insignia right underneath them. It's a nice design touch or Easter egg for those people who like paying attention to those types of things. And in addition to that, you have another running lamp down here, which is also a very nice touch. Okay, so now the controversial part, the front grille. This is the second refresh of the 6th generation Camaro. Yes, they refreshed it in 2018, and then the results were that the grille or the Chevy logo here moved and was integrated into the center divider between the two grills, and people went absolutely berserk. Nobody liked it. So much so that Chevy said, you know what, forget it, we're going to redesign it again. And they redesigned it and it looks like this now. I'm glad to say they did that because this looks much, much better. I still think the original 6th gen looked the cleanest, but this is a necessary refresh to make it look a little different. Now there are some opinions with that, and some people still dislike this second refresh as well, but let's just leave that alone for a second and let's talk about the grille. It's a split grille. There's a center section up here. It's got a Chevy SS logo here. This does not have the flow tie. That is reserved for the ZL1, the highest horsepower version of the Camaro. And then you come down to the bigger portion of the grille, and this resembles more of what you see in the ZL1. It's a very big opening, and I'm glad to see both the upper portion of the grille and the bottom portion of the grille are functional. They're allowing air through and they're extracting it from on top of this hood up here in the extractor. So let me crouch down here a little bit and let's talk about kind of these sections here. What I've seen in some of the Camaros is this section here is completely blacked out, and it makes this middle portion here almost completely black and transparent and provides a contrast from these little winglets here in the front end. Okay, and then now let's come down to this splitter portion here, or the bottom of the bumper. As a part of the 1LE package, you get this aerodynamic piece. It's a really cool looking piece. It's painted in black. It's pretty substantial and sticks out pretty far out. In addition to that, on the side you have these subtle winglets or somewhat canards. They're obviously not as aggressive as what you see in the highest horsepower ZL1, but they are there. In addition to that, let me come up here from these winglets. There are little air intakes that go to cool the brakes on both sides. I'm glad to see that, from what I can see, there are no fake air inlets in the front end of the Camaro. And just overall, I like the front end. It's not as terrible as some people say it is. In person, it actually looks a lot better than in pictures. All right, so here we are looking at the side profile of the SS1LE, and I think this is a very cool looking angle for this car. In addition to that, I wanted to show you guys that the belt line of the Camaro is actually really high compared to other cars. That makes the windows extremely short or narrow, depending on what angle you're looking at them. In addition to that, it makes the windshield very narrow. So the common complaint that people talk about in the 6th generation and even in the 5th generation was the visibility is really bad. And that's because of this high belt line. It makes those windows really narrow. Now, is this a big deal? Does it affect visibility to a point where it's terrible? I personally don't think so. It is very true when people say, oh, you get used to it. But for me, I didn't really even have to get used to it. I didn't mind it whatsoever. So I think that's just an overblown thing where the visibility and people talk about it on how much it's terrible. I personally just don't think so. And just one other thing on the side profile, as a part of the 1LE, you get blacked out mirror caps, which look really cool. The mirrors are maybe not the best looking, but the black does give you a nice contrast and suits really nicely with the flat black hood. Okay, so now we're looking at the rear of the SS1LE, and this is by far my favorite element as far as design goes of this Camaro. I think it just looks so clean and simple. It's got a quad exhaust, it's got clear taillights. It's just great. I like the back portion better than the front design. All right, so let's get into a little bit more detail. So let's talk about the wing. You get this as a part of the 1LE package. It's flush with the trunk, which I like. There are no prongs and all these things that manufacturers are doing nowadays. It's very understated. It's not very tall. It's not very clunky. It's a clean, simple spoiler. Very nice. The thing about it that's interesting, that looks a little weird, is that it's 3 pieces. Let me explain. So there's a little piece that's here on the body panel, and then there's a larger piece that is on the trunk, and then there's another sectional piece on the other side. It's kind of divided, but that's just because of the way the design language and the trunk of the Camaro. It's either this or those brackets that hold it up, and I prefer this much better. Okay, now let's move down to the taillights. I love the fact that they are clear taillights. They look so cool. They have a 3D element to them. When it lights up, it just looks fantastic in the day and at night. It's a quad design, and in general, it just looks fantastic. Coming down from there, you have a black Chevy logo, which is a part of the 1LE package. All right, so now let's talk about the trunk, because this is a daily driver car. Some people use this on a regular basis. They need somewhere to put their stuff. So let's talk about the trunk. So how do you open it? There's a button on the key. You press on that twice, it pops open. There's a button on the interior. In addition to that, for conveniency, you have a button down here which you can press. So long as you have the key with you, it will pop open the trunk. You are greeted with a very generous storage space. It's very deep. The opening, however, is cut in an interesting way. It's not very wide, it's not small, but it's interesting, let's just call it that. But like I said, the trunk is extremely deep. You can very easily fit 2 larger pieces of luggage in here. In addition to that, maybe 1 carry-on bag, so you are not going to have any problems with storage space or taking this thing on a weekend getaway and putting all of what you need with you in the trunk. All right, so now let's talk about the lower portion of the rear end, and this is the fun stuff. The diffuser, it's just so clean, so simple. It's painted in black, and it spans across the entire length of the car. As a part of the 1LE package, I'm sorry, it's painted in black. And again, as a part of the 1LE package, you get the performance exhaust. So that means you get quad exhaust outlets, as opposed to in the regular SS, it's a dual exhaust. This is a dual mode exhaust, so they open and close to make it louder or quieter. And it sounds absolutely fantastic, making the noise from that V8 engine. Take a listen. Now, say what you want about the Chevrolet small block pushrod engine, but it still sounds fantastic, even by 2020 standards, where engines are getting so complex. So let's talk about the engine. It's the LT1. It's the same one that you find in several other Chevrolet cars, more specifically, or most popularly found in the Corvette, the C7 Corvette, and it has 455 horsepower, 455 foot-pounds of torque. It's a 6.2 liter naturally aspirated engine. It's direct injected as well. So that engine is mated to a 6-speed manual transmission with rev matching. For the 2021 model year, Chevrolet added an option to get a 10-speed automatic in the 1LE package, where previously you had to get the manual option only. 0 to 60 in 3.9 or 4 seconds even. Electronic limited slip differential to a 373 gear ratio rear end. Rear wheel drive, as I mentioned, 3,750 pounds. Now, Chevrolet got a lot of grief for the 5th generation on how heavy it was and how it just felt so sluggish. So they reduced a lot of weight going from the 5th to the 6th gen. They paid a lot of attention to that and brought the weight down to about that 3750 weight range compared to almost 4,200 pounds in the ZL1 trim. Now, as far as the design goes, there's nothing really special happening in here. There's a plastic cover on top of the engine. It's got what Jay Leno calls the Monte Carlo bar, but it's a structural piece for rigidity, and it's got a cool looking Chevrolet performance badge on top of it. And the hood. So those functional vents that I was talking about earlier, here's a glimpse of them. You can see that they're dual entry, and they are extracting heat from the engine and also taking in air from the front grille. So overall, it is pretty down to business up here. The engine architecture is very familiar. It's been around for decades. The engine design, as far as the front end goes, is nothing really special. So more just function over form. Okay, so now let's look at one of the cooler things about the 1LE package. It's these unique wheels that you get. They are forged wheels, 20 inches all around. They're 10 inches in width in the front and 11 inches in the rear. It's an 11-inch wheel in the rear, so very wide. 285 Goodyear F1 tires up front, and in the rear 305 section rear tires. So you are getting substantial large wheels, wide wheels with big meaty tires. Going inside the wheel barrel, you have Brembo brakes on all 4 corners. In the front, the calipers are painted with a very cool 1LE insignia. They are painted in red as well. The brake rotor itself is 14.8 inches in the front and 13.3 inches in the rear. It is a monoblock caliper with 6 pistons up front and 4 pistons in the rear. So you're getting some very serious wheel, tire, brake performance in this 1LE package. All right, so now the interior portion of the Camaro 1LE review. And I gotta say, it's true what they say. It does feel like you're sitting in the car and the windows are kind of tall or short, the belt line is high, and the visibility is different. It's not impaired. That's what I want to make a point about, as I talked about earlier. It's not terrible to where you can't see anything outside of this car. Is it different? Yes. Do some people probably have to get used to it? Yes, definitely, it's different. But for me, I found it, I didn't find any difficulties in adjusting to this car or feeling comfortable in it. Okay, so let's talk about the interior or some of the highlights of the interior. Come inside and let's talk about this seat that I'm sitting in. This is a Recaro seat as a part of the 1LE package. It is a comfortable seat. How does it compare to the Recaro seat in my Shelby GT350? I think it feels the same. As far as comfortability goes. The one thing that's different about this seat and the Shelby seat is that this is a automatic seat. I have the ability to forward the actual seat, take it back automatically, the backrest forwards and backwards automatically. So that's a convenience feature. The bolstering is fixed. It's aggressive. I don't have the ability to expand and contract. I don't have lumbar. So if those things are important to you, know that you are going to miss them in this 1SS trim level. Beyond that, the complaint I have about the seat is that the shoulder area, the frame of the seat, I feel like the material or the cushioning is extremely hard. It's a really hard piece, or at least it feels really hard when you're sitting in it. It's not uncomfortable, it's just a hard piece. Let's just call it that. Now let's move to the steering wheel, and it's a small diameter steering wheel. It does have a flat bottom. In the 1LE package, it's covered in Alcantara, which is not my favorite material. This car has several thousand miles on it, and already it is pretty beat up. The Alcantara is pretty washed away at this point. There are multi-function buttons here to raise and lower the audio, accept and reject the phone call. So all of that stuff is pretty standard. The steering wheel is adjustable. It's manually adjustable. There's a latch here. It goes up and down and in and out. So it does have that level adjustability. Next, let's talk about the gauges. So the Camaro has a hybrid style gauge layout. So it's got analog gauges for your speed and your RPM. And then there's a center section that is a digital readout. So you've got a plethora of information in there for your trip, your MPG, your performance pages, things like that, your ability to configure the heads-up display, which I will talk about here in a minute. But the gauges are very clear, very easy to read. Now, one of the things that's interesting about these gauges are that they're configurable. There are two visual settings. One is called the standard setting and one is the technology setting. The reason why I'm bringing this up is the standard setting looks like an old school, not old school, but something from maybe 5 or 10 years ago in what you see in Chevy pickup trucks. You've got this 4-pod gauge cluster up at the top, and it looks like it doesn't fit in here. So that was something that's interesting. I'm wondering why Chevy even made that an option, but who knows? Anyway, so now let's talk about the head-up display. So the head-up display in Chevy cars in general, I've driven the C8 Corvette, the C7 Corvette, now this one, and the head-up display is fantastic in this car. I love the fact that I can just lower it, get it out of my field of sight. I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to go in any of the settings. Everything is controlled via these two buttons here. I have the head-up display button here, which brings it up or lowers it based off of where you want it in your field of sight. Like I said, you have the ability to lower it and it completely disappears. And then there's an info button. You push that and it toggles through what it shows you. So it has the RPM gauge, it has a speed gauge, it has the RPM gauge plus the navigation and other information like radio. So it's really clean, really simple, easy to configure, easy to adjust. So Chevy has done a fantastic job with the head-up display in the Camaro. Now moving up from there and coming to the side, the infotainment screen, it is a 8-inch unit. It comes standard in all Camaros. You do have the option to get navigation, but I would personally skip that because you have the ability to use Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Kudos to Chevy for looking out for both of the more popular operating systems in smartphones now. So the system is actually very clear. It's extremely easy to use. There are buttons or shortcuts for everything. It's a touch screen and the color layout is good. This is the updated system. It's the same thing that I saw in the C8 Corvette. So I was happy with it there. I'm happy with it here. It's a very simple, easy, functional infotainment system to use. And then you come down to a very clean and integrated climate control system, which has a row of buttons here. These climate control vents are a very cool design. They have a 360-degree movement, and to adjust the temperature is a turning of a knob. So that's very, very cool. This is something that debuted in the 6th generation, and it declutters the interior significantly. In the 1LE, you get a short throw shifter. It is a rather short piece. It feels really nice in the hand. There is a metal piece with a red SS piping that sets it off really nicely. The shifter is also Alcantara, which is also very, very beat up, but overall the shifter feels good. It's not as notchy as my GT350 shifter, I can tell you that as a fact, but it does have a nice neutral feel. It doesn't feel like jello, but it gives you good feedback. The clutch feel. The clutch is very different than my GT350. It's very progressive, as opposed to in the GT350, it's got like nothing, and then always just grabs almost at the top of the pedal. This is a lot more progressive and it feels more natural. Then you come to the center section. Not much storage here, guys. Very, very little storage, as a matter of fact. It's actually a pretty large piece, the center section itself, but the storage inside of it is very small. So not much storage in the center section. Now about the back seats, they're not really back seats. You're not gonna be able to sit back there. I tried sitting behind myself, and the seat is basically touching the seat in the back. Unless you have a twig size legs or you're a child or a smaller individual, there's absolutely no way you're going to be able to sit back there. Your legs are going to get crushed. So unless you're going to sit really far forward, you're not going to be able to fit anybody back there, so don't plan on it. Okay, so as far as the overall interior, is it cool? No, not really. Does it have a lot of flash? No, not really. But the interior itself is pretty functional. Everything is easy to use, easy to get used to. It's just the whole fact of the windows and the belt line being so tall and the windows being so narrow. Some people will have to get used to it. But like I said, this is not a showstopper issue as far as the feel or the windows go. All right, so we made it to the driving portion of the review, but before getting started, of course, I wanted to show you what the key looks like. It's another underwhelming key. That is what it looks like. Come on, camera, focus. There you go. There's the 3 buttons there. And then on the back side, it just has the bow tie Chevy logo. So nothing really exciting going on here. All right, as far as price goes, this car is a 1SS trim level. It's the lowest trim level that you can get a V8 in. Actually, no, I take that back. There's the LT1 now, but above the LT1, this is the lowest level you can get a 1LE V8 in a Camaro. So this is a $45,000, $46,000 car, but these are available with deep discounts because of the pandemic going on, and just in general, the Camaro sales haven't been doing so well, which may lead to the Camaro dying off once this generation is complete, or the life cycle is complete. As far as visibility goes, this is a topic I've been talking about in this video. You do feel the windows are short, but the visibility isn't terrible. The only challenging portion, there's 2 of them in this car, because the hood lines or the belt line is so high. When you try and look over the wheel arches, you start to gain a little bit of difficulty, some visibility there. You don't know where your tire is. This is somewhat of a challenge when you are parking next to a curb. You don't want to scratch your wheel. And then the second point about, or challenge with visibility, is over your passenger side shoulder. There's a little peephole there, but it's not big enough, and the structural piece of the body is too large for you to be able to see clearly out of. It's not a huge problem as long as you have your mirror adjusted properly, but it is something that I realized is somewhat of a challenge. But overall, as far as visibility goes, it's pretty good. I can see everything outside my peripherals. I don't have a blind spot over my shoulder. My mirror is adjusted properly, and the B pillar is very far back in the Camaro. That's one of the, actually, it doesn't really even have a B pillar. And then this car has a rear view camera. It does not have a front camera. It does not have front parking sensors. It does have rear ones, but the 1SS package also does not have blind spot monitoring. So I believe that comes in the 2SS. So if it's something you're really concerned about, you'll have to jump up to the 2SS to get the blind spot monitoring. I personally didn't have any issues. Just adjust your mirrors. How did you do it when blind spot monitoring wasn't around? So it's not that big of a deal. All right, so now with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and fire this thing up. You have to put it in neutral, or you don't have to actually. I personally like to leave it in neutral. Foot on the clutch, foot also on the brake. Start, stop. It sounds really good, actually. I was surprised on how good this Camaro exhaust is tuned. It sounds excellent. Not as good as the Shelby, but pretty good for a pushrod engine, simple engine. All right, safety first. Let me put it in. Let's start off with sport mode, the best mode, obviously. All right, like I said, when I put it in gear, the shifter or the clutch feel is very progressive. I like the way it feels. The shifter is not very notchy, but it does have excellent feel. So here we go. Let's go for it and let's tell you. Oh, and the parking brake automatically releases. You don't have to worry if you forget to leave it on and you're driving miles with it up. So that's the beauty of the electronic parking brake, I guess. So because the 1LE has a low spoiler, let us take it easy out of here. All right, here we go. And I'm just gonna go for it right off the bat because this is somewhat of an empty street. There's nobody behind me, nobody in forward. Turn rev matching, downshifts on, gas. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I don't know if you could hear the exhaust pops and bangs, but I'm telling you, this thing is tuned really, really well. Let's get another one. So first gear, I don't know how to use launch control and I don't care. I'm just gonna go for it like this, drop it a little bit, slide in, foot on the floor, losing traction. Oh yeah, oof, good power, very, very linear power delivery, works really well. Feels very similar to the C7 Corvette. Obviously this is a little bit heavier than a C7 Corvette, but the engine feels very lively, very linear power band. It's naturally aspirated, of course, it's gonna feel that way because the torque builds very progressively. It's not like a supercharger engine or a turbocharger engine. Well, more turbocharger engine where you've got turbo lag and you're just waiting and waiting until the turbos spool up and then you're finally going. So as far as the engine goes, or the feel, the speed, it is a very quick car. It does feel basically the same speed as my Shelby does. I don't know if this is just a perception, but because of the Voodoo engine in the Shelby, I feel like that feels faster in the seat of the pants feel. Now, that leads me to a point here I want to make about this car and this engine, the LT1, is the question I asked earlier in the video is, does this car feel fun to drive, or is it fun to drive? It is fun to drive because of the manual transmission, but does it feel special? Like, does it have that specialness, for the lack of a better term, that I feel in my Shelby GT350? That's really the only way I can describe it. And I feel like it's lacking there a little bit. The character, I feel like, is missing. Like, when you're driving it around slowly, it doesn't feel, I don't know, I feel like there's just something missing, and it's somewhat unfair because I'm comparing it to a Shelby GT350 with a flat plane crank engine. Oh, straight road, let's see what it's got. Here we go, second gear. Let's see, all the way, 6,007. Yeah. Strong motor. And the rev matching downshifts are so cool. First car I've driven with the rev matching downshift. Listen to this. Effortless. It's so amazing. And the thing that is so underrated about it, people always talk about the downshifts, but on the upshifts, it smooths out your shifts so well. It's just fantastic. I don't know why people talk bad things about the automatic rev matching and the on the upshift and the downshift. So that's the engine. It's a healthy engine. You're not going to be disappointed, and especially at this price point, it's a good value. All right, now let me talk a little bit about this transmission. It feels really good. You can see me, the shifts are the shifts are short as a part, terrible road, as a part of the 1LE package, and it's a good shifter. It's less notchy, like I said, than the GT350, and I'm sorry I keep comparing it to the GT350 because that's the last manual transmission car I've driven, and it's my own personal car, so I've got the most experience with that. So yeah, the transmission feels good. The shifter, the clutch feel is very, very good. It's very neutral, very progressive. The grab point is very good. Like you can literally just lift off of it without any throttle and it will engage and drive away really nicely. I like it a lot. As far as the driving modes go, remember when I mentioned earlier on, you have the ability to tailor the exhaust. So if you want to drive in tour mode, so if I go into tour mode, the exhaust becomes very quiet. It's not stealth, but there's a separate mode for tour, and it becomes that character that I was talking about, where it's missing something. It doesn't become exciting if you drive it in tour. The steer mode is pretty good. The steering is very direct. The feel is good. The actual steering itself is very direct. There is no deadness in this wheel. You point it, it goes left, right, center. It just goes. It's very good. When you put it in sport and track, it doesn't get overly heavy. Actually, I take it back. In track mode, it does get heavy. In sport mode, it feels pretty good. It's the right balance. In sport mode is where you want to be. In track mode, like in most cars, it's artificially heavy for the street. If you just want to have some fun, you're going to want to just stay in sport mode. So that's it as far as the modes go. Okay, and then rounding out the, driving portion with, this is a terrible, terrible road. The driving portion with the daily drivability of this Camaro. This is where I was so shocked, probably after the rev matching on how good it is and the exhaust on how good it sounds with the daily drivability. Like, I'm driving on some pretty uneven roads and this thing just takes it perfectly fine. I can tell you for sure, this rides better than my Shelby GT350. I know that's somewhat hard to believe, but that's my opinion. I do feel like the Shelby has a rougher ride compared to this Camaro. I can't get enough of that exhaust. It sounds so good, man. Wow, it's really, really good. Not as good as the Shelby, but I know I keep saying that. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna treat this on its own. On its own, this exhaust sounds very good. And with the rev match downshifts, very good. So, daily drivability. This is a very comfortable car. Soaks up bumps. The overall layout of the car is good. If you can get past, some people have like this visibility issue, which is not really that big of a deal. This is a very daily driver friendly car. Guaranteed you will not have problems daily driving this car. It's a great car. It's a good value. It's a proven philosophy. Big naturally aspirated engine, manual transmission, which is very rare. Sounds good, sounds really good actually. The exhaust pops and bangs sound really good. The transmission feel is good. It's comfortable for a car that has a firm suspension package. So I don't know what else you could ask for out of a $45,000 car for especially a $45,000 car that you're going to get at a discount, probably at around $30,000, maybe $40,000 out the door. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue against this 1LE package. It's great for the street, and I'm sure if I had it on the track, I would say the same thing. So overall, good car? Yes, good car. Is it a fun car to drive all the time? If you turn the exhaust off, it's kind of boring. You got to drive it, you got to put your foot in it a little bit, get that exhaust pops and bangs going. You got to be in sport mode. Otherwise it feels ordinary, but if you get beyond that, this is a super deal. Look at this rev match downshift. Oh, sounds so good. All right, guys, that's enough talking. I'm gonna drive a little bit more, but if you have any other questions, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Until next time, drive steady.